Hey everybody, so today is the third and final part of what is your homestead starting point. In previous videos, in the first part we went over buying completely raw land. In part 2 we went over buying land with some infrastructure already on it. And today we're going to be talking about buying property with a home already on it. So basically you're move-in ready. So that is obviously probably the easiest starting point, go figure, is if you have a house already move-in ready. So at this point though, okay, so you have a house that's move-in ready. Now, that's fantastic. You don't have to worry about building. You don't have to worry about electricity or water or anything like that. It's all already incorporated into the property. And like I said, in the first video, we're not even talking about off-grid. We're literally just right now talking about homesteading. So you have a house. You move in. You're ready to go. Now what do you do? Biggest thing you need to be doing is planning. Even if you buy a house, the property may not be fenced in, so there may still be some structural things that you need to do or infrastructure type things you need to do. You may need to build barns, you may need to have sheds, you may need to do fencing, things like that. So just because you buy a move-in ready house doesn't necessarily mean your entire property is move-in ready for a homestead. So the next thing after that point is, say you do have barns or sheds and fencing and everything like that. So literally all you have to do is start your homestead. This is where planning takes a big step. Like, this is going to be a step that you don't want to just start throwing stuff out on your property all willy-nilly and thinking you're going to put the garden over here and do your animals this way and whatnot. You really need to come up with a plan on how you're going to be working your property. There's a section right now on our property that I have marked out for our garden. Now, of course, this year I just did something very small and basic with containers. And just did enough to kind of supplement what our normal food bill would technically be, because I wasn't quite sure where I even wanted the plants. I wasn't sure where I wanted how much I needed to grow or anything like that based on the climate we're in now versus the climate we were in Florida. So I did something very small just to get started and to kind of give myself a little bit of a test. So that's definitely something you can do. However, right now I do have a much larger garden spot planned out. It's about probably 40 or 50 feet long and about 20 feet wide for a garden. And now, mind you, we are also a family of 5. So if you're just getting into this and you're, husband and wife just got married kind of thing, have no children, then obviously, your garden situation doesn't need to be quite as large as ours. But again, you have to scale it to the size for your family. And eventually, do you want to be able to sell any of these crops or anything like that? So that's something you kind of want to think about too. But right now, what I have done with our garden area that I'm planning on putting in our kind of more pots, because I do like container gardening, is I have it staked out. And there are trees nearby this garden spot, but it's closer to the house, and it's not like super out in the middle of the field where everything's going to get baked regardless of what time of day it is. So the garden does get some shade, which is good. I want it that way. I purposely picked out this spot for that reason. However, what I've been doing over the last few days is actually watching how the shade moves from space to space to space in the garden. And I'll probably actually do a video on this at another time, but I've been basically doing as I call it, a shade study, and been figuring out what parts of the garden get shade at what time throughout the day. I know we're in the summer, so it's going to be different in the winter. It's going to be different in the spring, obviously, a little bit different in the fall, things like that. But overall, it'll give me a really good idea of, areas that may be super shady or, areas that are still super sunny. So that's something to think about. You're going to want to actually plan your garden. Pay attention to your property and pay attention to where it gets sun. Is your property northwest or north-south facing or east-west facing? Things like that play into it as well too. If you do have a south-facing property, that's fantastic because you're going to get the most sun. But you still have to be mindful of, if you do have any trees on the property, how much shade does certain parts of your property get. Also, with livestock, great starter livestock. Obviously chickens, everybody gets chickens. But if you're looking for a little bit larger livestock, I highly, highly recommend sheep. I did have a video called Why Sheep, and that explains it a little bit further. But sheep are a very easy kind of starter livestock if you're not quite used to having those kind of animals. And then that's something that you can move up to having cattle, and then eventually, goats and things like that. And also too, there are different animals that work well with different types of environments. Sheep and goats are actually both great for wooded, partially wooded areas. Our sheep do go through woods and things like that, and they're perfectly fine. It's actually really good for our sheep to be going through woods. It's good for sheep in general to go through wooded areas to get the tannins from the leaves and the trees and things like that. Helps with parasite resistance. So if you do have a moderately wooded piece of property, might be a good idea to get some sheep and some goats. If you do have pasture land, obviously, you know, you see behind us pasture. At some point we are going to be getting some cattle. Now we're not going to be doing like a full cattle ranch kind of thing, but we are going to get enough to be sustainable for our family. And that's something else you need to think about too, is in quantity. You know, how many of these types of animals do you want? Are you going to want to breed these animals? Are you going to want to sell breed stock? Things like that. And all this goes into planning, because since you have moved into a move-in ready home, you don't really have to think about a lot of the beginning prep stuff like you do if you're buying raw land or even land with some infrastructure. You already kind of have that done. You're okay. You have, you know, all your stuff taken care of, and now it's just working the land. But that's something you have to think about too, with the land as well, is what is your land like? Like I'm talking about like grass, and that's something that my husband's really good at. That man can pick out different blades of grass and tell you what kind of grass it is, or all the different clovers we have in our property, or what kind of broadleaf weeds we have. Believe it or not, those kind of things are important to having biodiversity, or, you know, plant diversity on the property, because the more diverse your grassland, your pasture area is, the better it's going to be for the animals. So that's something you have to think about. What is the pasture or your woods like in the way of nutrients for your animals? What kind of animals do you want to have on your property, and how many do you want to start with? And then also too with just like kind of the basics of your garden and planning out your garden. And over time this is going to change. Just like over time, I know probably the size of our garden will change. Obviously we have sheep that we plan on, you know, they're breeding right now. The rams are chasing around the ewes and everything else. So we plan on breeding and selling our sheep and everything. So we have that as an income stream that we will be working on. So that's already something we've started thinking about in the future. But these are things to think about, guys, in the way of how much food production do you want on your family? How much food production can you have on your family? Because obviously for us, we have a rather large piece of property, so our food production can be way higher. Well, it will be way higher than what we actually as a family need. So we're excited because we will be able to either turn it into an income, or even bless people and give away animals for free and bless other people so that they can start their homesteads. So that's something you have to think about, is how much can your property hold, and how much planning are you going to go into it. Something I do want to suggest in that way, there's a gentleman by the name of Joel Salatin who's really, really big into sustainable, regenerative type agriculture. And believe it or not, you can run a lot more animals on a smaller piece of property than what you realize. And if you watch any of his videos, Joel Salatin, Polyface Farms, you will be amazed at what you can do even with a small piece of property. So I highly suggest going the sustainable regenerative route, especially if you do have a smaller piece of property, because you'll be able to run a lot more animals and keep them really healthy, but run a lot more animals in a smaller space. So again, definitely do your due diligence with planning. If you do have a move-in ready home, make sure you start working on those plans. Make sure you start drawing them out and figuring the numbers out before you even start throwing stuff out onto the property, because you don't want to get sheep or cows or even start planting and have never done it before, have no idea what you're doing. Because guys, if you do that, and if you, even with sheep, if you get sheep and have no idea what you're going to do, what you're doing with them, you're going to end up losing a lot of them, and you don't want that. You know, it's just kind of money down the drain. So just some things to think about. Of course, as always, if you have questions or comments or anything like that, go ahead and drop them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, if you are thinking about other forms of buying property, check out part 1 and part 2 of what is your homestead starting point, and those will kind of give you better ideas for if you're thinking about not moving into a move-in ready home and doing it a little bit rougher of a way. So, all right, hope you all have a great day.